Chapter 7. So, this chapter, I think we're going to learn a little bit more about Brian's relationship with the skunk, and we're really going to see if it's a good choice or not this chapter, so pay attention. Chapter 7. He didn't know the time, but somewhere in the middle of the night, he awakened suddenly. He had come to rely on his senses, and he knew something had changed to snap him awake that way, and he lay with his eyes wide in the dark, listening, smelling, trying to see. He did not have to wait long. There was a soft rustle, then a woofing sound, and the whole wall of the shelter peeled away from the rock as if it got caught in an earthquake. Away and down, and Brian, still in his bag, was looking up in the dark at the enormous form of a bear leaning over him. There was no time to react, to move, to do anything. Meat, Brian had time to think. He smelled the venison and come for it. He'd come for the meat. And it was true. The bear had come for the meat. But the problem was that Brian lay between the bear and the meat, and the bear cuffed him to the side, as if it wasn't much of a cuff. Nowhere near what the bear could have done, which would have broken Brian's legs. But the bag was zipped, and Brian became tangled in it and couldn't move fast enough to stay out of the way, so the bear hit him again. This time hard. The blow took Brian in the upper thigh, and even though the bag, it was solid enough to nearly dislocate his hip. He cried out, "Ah!" The bear stopped dead in the darkness. Brian could see the head turn to look back and down at him, a slow turning, huge, and full of threat. And the bear's breath washed over him, and he thought, "I'm going to die now. All this that I've done, I'm going to die because the bear wants to eat, and I'm in the way." He could see the bear's teeth as it showed them, and he simply couldn't do anything. Couldn't move, couldn't react. It was over. The bear started to move down toward Brian, and then hesitated, stopped and raised his head again, and turned to look back over its shoulder to the left. Half a beat and Brian lay still, staring up at the bear. But now a new smell. Over the smell of the bear, a rank, foul, sulphurous, and gagging smell as the bear turned and took a full shot of skunk spray directly in the eyes. Betty had arrived. Whether she'd just been out hunting and had come back, or had been awakened and surprised, or simply didn't like bears very much, whatever the reason, she had dumped a full load in the bear's face. The effect was immediate and devastating. Rawr! The bear seemed to turn inside itself, knocking Brian farther to the side, and rolled backward out of the shelter area, slamming its head back and forth on the ground, trying to clear its eyes, hacking and throwing up as it vanished in the night. Brian looked to the source of all of this. Betty stood near the end of the shelter, still with her tail raised, only now aimed at Brian. She twitched it once, then again, and Brian shook his head. "I'm sorry, I just didn't think you'd be thinking of food." He took a piece of meat from the pile, a big one, and tossed it to her, and she lowered her tail, picked up the meat, and waddled off into the dark in the direction of her burrow. Brian lay back in his bag. His shelter was a mess. The wall tipped over and his hip hurt. But it wasn't raining, and the bag was warm. He could fix things up in the morning. The stink of skunk was everywhere. Much of what Betty had shot at the bear had gone around it and hit the wall, but Brian didn't mind. In fact, he thought, "I've grown kind of fond of it. Ugh. I'll have to make sure to give her extra food." It was like having a pet nuclear device. He went to sleep smiling. In the morning, he found that the damage was not as extreme as he thought. The bear had tipped the wall away and down, but the dry mud had held it together, and Brian, after 4 heaving tries, tipped it back up and against the rock. He chopped a hole in the thin ice near the edge of the lake and brought up new mud to pack in around the seam, and inside an hour it was good as new. Then he reviewed his thinking. The war bow wouldn't help, at least not as a protective device. He shot it and made it work for him, but in the dark, in the night, in the shelter, there was no way he could have gotten the bow aligned or an arrow into the bear. And God knew what would have happened if he had hit the bear with an arrow, especially if he missed anything vital. The bear would have been really mad then. Even Betty wouldn't have been able to stop the thing. Perhaps he thought a lance, a killing lance. If he used the same principle with the arrows, he went back to the stone he'd been chipping arrowheads from and studied it. He would need a wider, longer head, and the flakes came off too small for a spear. Near it, there were other black stones, however, and he tapped at them with the back of the hatchet, knocking off flakes until he hit one that had a bigger pattern. 3 times he hit and took off the flakes that were irregular or that broke in the middle. But on the 4th try, he came away with a piece almost as wide as his palm and about 7 inches long, tapering to a sharp point and with 2 edges like razors. He worked tie notches into the round end and mounted the point in one of his hardwood spears, carefully splitting the wood back and then tying the head in place with a thin strip of deer hide, which proved to be much tougher than the rabbit skin, and burning the hair off when he was done. He hefted the lance and held it out, bracing with his arm. It wouldn't do any good to throw. But for in close, like last night, if he had to use it, the head should cause some damage. Or at least discourage a bear. He nodded. good. If nothing else, it gave him a feeling of security. Later, he would think on how strange things were. He would never see the bear again, and inside the shelter, he would never be threatened again. Yet, the lance would save his life. All right, and scene. So, that chapter was quick, but a lot happened. So we saw that Brian got awakened in the middle of the night by the bear and was face to face with it again, and the bear wanted his food, but this time it wasn't like Brian was trying to fight the bear off, but Brian's shelter is so small, like the author described, and Brian was sleeping in front of the meat to kind of protect it, but he also, the way Brian ties himself in his sleeping bag, he couldn't get out of it quickly and either move out of the way or try and get his weapons and fight the bear off. So what happened was the bear was just pushing him, but you know how big bears are. He was pushing him hard with his paw, and it was hurting Brian, and Brian was pretty much just frozen, I guess frozen with how scared he was. And he, like he said, he thought he was going to die. And it wasn't looking good for Brian until Betty came in and saved the day and sprayed the bear, and then the bear ran away. And what I thought was kind of funny was that right after Betty saved Brian's life, Brian didn't even get a chance to say thank you. As soon as the bear ran away, Betty was like, "Where my food at?" So it kind of makes me think that Betty wasn't coming to save him. I think Betty was coming to get his food, or her food. Sorry, Betty was coming to get her food, and she saw the bear in the way, and she sprayed the bear. And once the bear was gone, she's like, "All right, I'm ready to eat." But with that being said, I want to move into my first question, and it kind of goes back into the questions I've been asking for the past couple chapters, which is, do you think it was a good idea that Brian fed Betty and kept her around? And now after seeing what happened today, I mean, I don't know what you can say about that. So maybe think about your prediction, what you said the first time we talked about Betty, maybe what we said earlier today after we read chapter 6. And was your prediction right? Was it wrong? Do you still feel the same way? Why or why not? And then second, moving on, Brian realized that he could not just use the arrows for protection. And that the arrows are probably going to have to be used mainly for hunting. And he was probably going to need something else like a lance or something like a weapon that you can use up close with animals that you can use quickly to fight off animals and protect himself. So with that being said, chapter 7 was actually the ending of part 1 of the book. So the part 1 of the book was the transition from summer to fall and getting ready for the winter to start. So now chapter 8 is going to start part 2 of the book, which is going to be the actual winter. So now we're going to see it actually turn winter in the book, these next couple chapters we read. And with that being said, I want you to make a prediction or just just state your opinion based off what we read the past 7 chapters and mostly these past 2 chapters. Do you think Brian is ready for the winter? Yes or no? Why or why not? As always, either write your questions out, write your answers to the questions out, type them out, send them to your teacher, send them to Mr. Jones. And once again, it's our second week. Keep working hard. I'm so proud of how hard you worked last week. Keep up the great work. Looking forward to seeing all your answers and all your comments for classes. I'm sure we memorized the classes by now. If not, just say, "Hey, Mr. Jones, where are the gold ones?" Or, "Hey, Mr. Jones, where are the black ones?" Or, "Hey, Mr. Jones, where are the Migos glasses?" Whatever you want to say. I don't have them out right now, so I can't go find them right now. Sorry, but we should remember the glasses by now. So tell me which glasses you want me to wear, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.